Welcome to Conspiracist.
Great to be here.
So today we're diving into a really interesting and somewhat controversial area.
Absolutely.
We've got these materials looking into the hypothesis of a government cover-up, specifically around evidence for, well, the Lost City conspiracy.
That's the focus, yeah. Not trying to prove or disprove any specific lost city today, but really digging into this idea that governments or maybe other groups are actively hiding information.
Exactly. Our aim here is to stay really objective. Just look at the arguments presented in the sources you send over. We want to analyze the reasoning behind the cover-up claims.
Right. No personal takes, no dismissing things out of hand. It's about understanding the claims themselves, how they're structured based on these materials.
Okay, so where do we start? A lot of this seems to circle back inevitably to figures like Plato.
Well, yeah, Plato comes up a lot in your sources. His dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, they talk about Atlantis.
And he frames it quite specifically, doesn't he? Less like a clear myth and more like, well, a history.
That's a key point the materials highlight. Critias, in the dialogues, claims it's a real account, passed down through generations.
Right, originating with Egyptian priests, then through Solon. That lineage is presented as factual within the story.
Yes, and that framing lends it a certain, historical weight. It wasn't necessarily intended as just a fable, at least according to Critias in the text.
There's that interesting detail about the Egyptian priests claiming they preserved history while the Greeks kept losing theirs to disasters.
Adds another layer, doesn't it? Suggests a deeper, perhaps forgotten past.
So if we were to take Plato's account literally, as some proponents argue in these sources, that would mean a pretty radical rethink of ancient history.
Absolutely. An advanced civilization that far back, it challenges the standard timeline of development in the Mediterranean and beyond.
But then we hit the big stumbling block, which several of your articles point out, the lack of clear, widespread archaeological evidence.
Right. No unambiguous ruins of a massive, technologically sophisticated city from, say, 9,000 years before Plato's time.
And that absence of evidence. This is where the cover-up theory really takes hold, according to these materials.
Exactly. The argument shifts. It's not, we haven't found it yet. It's the evidence exists, but it's being hidden.
Okay, so let's explore that. According to the proponents cited in your sources, why? What are the alleged motivations for governments to go to such lengths?
One major theme that comes up repeatedly in the materials is the disruption of established narratives. Academic inertia, you could call it. Meaning finding something like Atlantis would force a complete rewrite of history books, archaeology, anthropology, everything.
It challenges the existing consensus.
Profoundly. And the argument goes that established institutions, universities, museums, maybe even governments funding them, have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. They might resist findings that overturn decades or centuries of accepted knowledge.
That's an interesting angle, the resistance to paradigm shifts. Though one of your articles also brought up a counterpoint about how science usually works.
Ah, yes. The competitive nature of research.
Right. Wouldn't researchers be desperate to announce such a find? It'd be the discovery of a lifetime. Could a conspiracy involving potentially hundreds, thousands of academics actually hold?
That's a very significant hurdle for the cover-up theory, and your materials do acknowledge it. Science thrives on discovery, on challenging old ideas, the fame, the funding. It would be immense.
Keeping something that big quiet seems, well, incredibly difficult, if not impossible, given how academia operates. Rivalries, leaks, the sheer number of people involved in any major dig or analysis.
It strains credulity for many, yes. The idea of a perfectly coordinated leak-proof conspiracy across different institutions and countries lasting for potentially decades, it's a big ask.
Okay, what other motivations are suggested in the sources for these alleged cover-ups?
Another one that pops up is nationalism, or perhaps geopolitical advantage.
How so?
The idea that maybe a specific nation finds evidence of an advanced lost civilization within its borders or connected to its history. They might suppress it to control the narrative, or maybe reveal it strategically to bolster national pride or even make historical claims.
Or conversely, maybe hide it if it contradicts a preferred national story.
That too. Your sources also touch on a darker side of this, historically speaking.
The misuse of these kinds of narratives.
Exactly. Linking modern nations to glorious lost pasts, sometimes used to justify superiority or expansionism. Think of the Nazi obsession with Thule or Atlantis. These ideas can be weaponized.
A really important point, though, our focus here is strictly on whether the cover-up itself is happening based on the claims.
Correct. The ethical implications are there, but we're examining the core claim. Is evidence being actively concealed by governments?
So when proponents make this claim, what kind of evidence do they typically point to according to your materials? Are there smoking guns, documented cases?
Well, this is where it gets tricky. The evidence cited in these sources often tends to be, let's say, circumstantial or based on interpretation.
Less hard proof, more connecting dots.
Pretty much. You see a lot of reinterpreting old texts, pointing to archaeological anomalies that haven't been fully explained, things like underwater structures that might be man-made but could also be natural formations.
Okay.
And then there are anecdotal accounts, stories for people who claim they saw something they shouldn't have, or researchers who say their funding was cut, or they were warned off investigating certain sites or topics.
But these accounts are often hard to verify independently.
Very much so. They become part of the lore surrounding the conspiracy, but concrete, verifiable proof, like leaked government documents specifically ordering the concealment of, say, Atlantean artifacts that seems to be missing in the materials provided.
So a key element we're seeing in the arguments presented is this idea that the lack of definitive proof is, itself, interpreted as evidence of a cover-up.
Yes, that's a common thread. The argument becomes, the evidence should be there, given the stories or anomalies. Since it's not widely known or accepted, it must be hidden.
It flips the burden of proof, in a way. Absence of evidence becomes evidence of absence due to conspiracy.
Precisely. It's a pattern often seen in conspiratorial thinking, as some of your articles touch upon, a fundamental distrust of official sources and a predisposition to believe something hidden must be going on.
Now, skepticism towards official narratives isn't always unwarranted, right? History has examples of governments concealing information.
Absolutely, and the sources acknowledge that. Think of things like MKUltra or Watergate. Governments do keep secrets, sometimes very big ones.
But the key distinction, as highlighted in the materials, is between skepticism based on specific evidence of wrongdoing or concealment in a particular case,
and a more generalized belief in a vast ongoing conspiracy that reinterprets everything through that lens, often without direct specific evidence for that particular conspiracy.
So it comes down to evaluating the claims critically, asking, what is the actual tangible evidence presented for this specific claim of a lost city cover-up?
Yes, and what are the alternative explanations for the observations? For instance, the lack of Atlantis evidence, could it be because Plato's account was allegorical? Or based on a distorted memory of a real but less grand event like the Thera eruption? Or simply that we haven't found it yet?
Are those alternatives given weight by the proponents described in your sources?
Often they're dismissed as part of the established narrative that the conspiracy seeks to uphold. Contradictory evidence or simpler explanations are sometimes seen as disinformation or naivety.
So when we step back and look at this hypothesis, the government cover-up of lost city evidence based only on the arguments presented in these materials,
we see a structure built largely on interpreting anomalies, anecdotal accounts, and a distrust of mainstream historical and archaeological consensus. The concrete, verifiable evidence for an active, ongoing, large-scale suppression campaign seems elusive within these specific sources.
the burden of proof, as you said, really lies with those making the extraordinary claim of a global conspiracy to hide remnants of entire civilizations.
Exactly. And extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. While the idea is undeniably captivating, who wouldn't want to uncover a hidden chapter of human history? A rigorous analysis, like the one we're trying to do here, has to stick to the evidence presented.
This deep dive really highlights how important it is to carefully weigh the evidence, consider alternative explanations, and differentiate between healthy skepticism and jumping to conclusions, especially with topics as intriguing as lost cities.
It does. The allure of the unknown is powerful, but our understanding has to be built on solid ground, verifiable facts, and logical reasoning, not just speculation about what might be hidden.
A fascinating look at the structure of the argument itself.
Indeed. Understanding how the claim is constructed is just as important as the claim itself.
Thanks for listening to Conspiracist.